Mr. Jordan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Zuckerberg, just as Mr. Pichai gave prior testimony to Congress saying there wasn't editorial manipulation on their platform, you have previously given testimony to the Congress saying that there is not editorial manipulation that disadvantages conservatives. And just like in the case of Google, there have been whistleblowers from Facebook that not only have offered evidence indicating your testimony was not truthful, but there's even video that suggests that content moderators that you employ are out there disadvantaging conservative content. I'm wondering if you are familiar with the experiences of Zach McElroy and Ryan Hartwig, two people who participated in Facebook content review, and what is your response to the very damning video evidence and the testimony from them that the culture that you lead within Facebook is one that disadvantages conservatives and leads to content manipulation?
So, Congressman, I'm somewhat familiar with the concerns that they've raised, and as I've said, we aim to be a platform for all ideas. We got into this because we want to give everyone a voice. I certainly do not want our platforms to be run in a way that has any ideological bias, and I want people to be able to discuss a range of issues. When people raise concerns like that, we do look into them to make sure that that everyone in our operation is behaving and upholding the standards that we would like. And if the behavior that they cited is true, then that would be unacceptable in our operation.
And following the release of those videos and that evidence from Project Veritas, will you then describe the investigation that Facebook undertook to root out these very corrosive effects on your platform?
Congressman, I'd have to get back to you with more details on that, but I know that we have ongoing training in what we do. And we certainly will look into any complaints that come up, and we want to make sure that in how we run the content review teams, that it's done in a way that reflects the values of the company around giving everyone a voice and being a platform for all ideas.
I'm concerned that the content review does reflect the values of the company, but those values don't in fact give everyone a voice. They prejudice against certain content. And while I appreciate training as a prophylactic endeavor to try to guide future content, it seems disingenuous for you to suggest that these videos come out that are very damning, that show the people that you trust with content moderation admitting on video that they disadvantage conservatives, that they label people who support the president as a way to push down their content and limit the reach of that content, for you to then come to us many months later after that was all over the news and the internet and say, well, you know, you'll get back to us and you do a little training. It seems to suggest that you don't take these allegations and this evidence very seriously. And so I'll ask the question perhaps in a different way. Would you revise your prior, in your prior testimony to Energy and Commerce, you said this does not happen, it cannot happen. Would you at least be willing to acknowledge, based on the irrefutable evidence before us that you don't seem to have investigated, that it is possible that at Facebook, your employees do have the power to disadvantage conservative viewpoints, and that they in fact have used that power in ways that we need to root out?
Congressman, my testimony in the past and today is about what our principles are as a company and what we try to do. Of course, when you have tens of thousands of employees, people make mistakes, people have some of their own goals some of the time, and it's our job in running the company to make sure that we minimize errors and that we make sure that the company's operations reflect the principles that we intend to run it on.
And when you fire people as a consequence of their politics, do you think that that impacts the culture and perhaps empowers some of the content moderators to also treat people worse as a consequence of their politics?
Congressman, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I'm not aware of any case where we have fired someone on behalf of their politics, and I would say that would be an inappropriate thing for us to do.
Why did you fire Palmer Luckey?
Congressman, I'm not sure it's appropriate to get into a specific personnel issue publicly,
I mean, I could just tell you that
I can
Palmer
assure you that
Luckey's
it was
NDA
not.
with you, I only have 10 seconds, but Palmer Luckey's NDA with you doesn't allow him to talk to anyone except government officials. I'm a government official. I've seen the messages where you have specifically directed Mr. Luckey to make statements regarding his politics for the benefit of your company. So I think both in the case of these content moderators and in the case of the testimony you just gave regarding Mr. Luckey and firing people over their politics, there is serious question as to whether or not you're giving truthful testimony here or whether it's lying before Congress. I see my time's expired and I'll yield back.
Congressman, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, in the emails that your company produced to the committee, there's one from David Weiner in 2014 where he's describing under the mergers and acquisitions advice within the company that you need to engage in a land grab. And he says, I hate the word land grab, but I think that's the best convincing argument and we should own that. And it goes on to describe a strategy wherein Facebook would spend 5 to 10% of its market cap each year to shore up its market position. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, Congressman, thanks for the opportunity to address this and frankly, to correct the record, because I believe that what he was referring to was a question that was incoming from investors about whether we would continue to acquire different companies. I don't think that wasn't referring to an internal strategy. It was referring to an external question that we were facing about how investors should expect us to act going forward. And I think he was discussing the fact that as mobile phones were growing in popularity, there were a lot of new ways that people could connect and communicate that were part of this overall broader space and market around human connection and helping people stay connected and share their experiences.
Okay, well, Mr. Zuckerberg, it seems to be both internal and external, because then in an email from you in 2012, we see a similar sentiment expressed. You write, we can likely always just buy any competitive startups. So is your desire to limit competition by purchasing your competitors consistent with the message to your investors that the way you'll run your company is through digital land grabs?
Congressman, I'm not sure I agree with the characterization of how we communicated with investors. But
it's your words, Mr. Zuckerberg.
But I think the broader point is that there were a lot of new ways that people can connect that were created by smartphones.
But this is about your merger and acquisition strategy. You went on to say one thing about startups is you can often acquire them. So, I mean, I'm not interested in how people connect. I'm interested in how you acquire businesses to limit competition.
The gentleman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
Congressman, in order to serve people better and help people connect in all the ways they want, we innovated and built a lot of new use cases internally, and we acquired others. And that, I think, has been a very successful strategy at serving people well. And a lot of the companies that we've been able to acquire have gone on to reach and help connect many more people than they would have been able to on their own.
You've grabbed a lot of land. I would say I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the chair of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
I'm just going to pick up where I left off. Mr. Pichai, there are rioting groups that are going unchecked with the posting of what I would contend is very violent video. Yet yesterday I was sent a YouTube video about doctors discussing hydrochloroquine and discussing the not dangers of children returning to school. And when I clicked on the link, it was taken down. And then I was sent a different link on YouTube and it was taken down. I just checked again just to make sure. And it says that this video has been removed for violating YouTube's community guidelines. How can doctors giving their opinion on a drug that they think is effective for the treatment of COVID-19 and doctors who think it's appropriate for children to return back to school violate YouTube's community guidelines when all of these videos of violence is all posted on YouTube?
Congressman, we believe in freedom of expression, and there is a lot of debate on YouTube about effective ways to deal with COVID. We allow robust debate. But in the area during a pandemic, we look to local health authorities. So for example, in the US, it would be CDC for guidelines around medical misinformation in a narrow way, which could cause harm in the real world. And so for example, if there is aspects of a video, and if it explicitly states something could be a proven cure, and that doesn't meet CDC guidelines, we would
It's free expression of speech, and you have these doctors who are giving their opinion as doctors, and I don't understand why YouTube and therefore Google thinks it's appropriate to silence physicians and their opinion of what can help and cure people with COVID-19. I'm going to switch quickly to Mr. Zuckerberg. I think at this point it's fairly obvious that technology platforms have been stifling conservative news and opinions. You employ a panel of content moderators. Can you explain how Facebook chooses who these moderators are?
Thanks, Congressman. We do hire a lot of people around the world to work on safety and security. Our team is more than 30 or 35,000 people working on that now. We certainly try to do this in a way that is neutral to all viewpoints. We want to be a platform for all ideas. I don't think you build a social product with the goal of giving people a voice if you don't believe that people being able to express a wide variety of things is ultimately valuable for the world. And we try to make sure that our policies and our operations ultimately reflect and carry that out.
Is there an ideological diversity amongst the content moderators?
Congressman, I don't think we choose to hire them on the basis of an ideology. They're hired all over the world. There's certainly a bunch in the U.S. There's diversity in where they're hired, but certainly we don't want to have any bias in what we do, and we wouldn't tolerate it if we discovered that.
So you don't specifically hire, say, conservative moderators and Democrat or liberal moderators so that there's a balance in your content moderators?
Congressman, in terms of the 30 to 35,000 people or more at this point who are doing safety and security review, that is correct. In terms of the people setting the policies, I think it is valuable to have people with a diversity of viewpoints involved so we can make sure that we have the different viewpoints represented in the policy development process. And we also consult with a number of outside groups whenever we develop new policies to make sure that we're taking into account all perspectives.
What are some of those outside groups that would be conservative leaning?
Congressman, I need to get back to you with a list of specific groups, but it would depend on what the topic is.
Can you just think of one? I mean, you said you reach out to outside groups. Can you think of one conservative outside group that you reach out to and use as a content moderator?
Congressman, I'm talking about different external stakeholders and groups that are inputs to our policy development process. And I'm not involved in those conversations directly, so I would have to get back to you with specifics on that. But I'm quite confident that we speak with people across the ideological spectrum when we're developing our policies.
I would very much appreciate a follow-up on that. Real quickly, can you briefly explain the approval process for third-party fact checkers, and how many fact checkers does Facebook employ?
Yes, thanks. We work with about 70 fact-checking partners around the world, and the goal of the program is to limit the distribution of viral hoaxes, so things that are clearly false, from getting a lot of distribution, but we don't ourselves want to be in the business of determining what is true and what is false. That feels like an inappropriate role for us to play. We rely on an organization called the Pointer Institute, and I think it's called the Independent Fact-Checking Organization that has a set of guidelines of what makes an independent fact-checker, and they certify those fact-checkers, and then any organization that gets certification from that group is qualified to be a fact-checking partner within Facebook.
Well, during that period of time, during the decade of the 90s and the 00s, I was involved as chairman of the Science Committee and chairman of this committee, and trying to make the net universal, and open it up to everybody. And one of the theses that we used is the net should end up becoming basically the debate on issues, not only in our country, but throughout the world. And in exchange for that, this committee and the Congress gave internet service providers immunity, so if somebody said something defamatory in what they posted, the ISPs could not be a part of a lawsuit for defamation. Now, after hearing Mr. Jordan give a long line of censorship of conservative viewpoints, I'm concerned that the people who manage the net, and the four of you manage a big part of the net, are ending up using this as a political screen. Conservatives are consumers too. And the way the net was put together in the eyes of Congress is that everybody should be able to speak their mind. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Jordan's litany of censorship zeroes in on Facebook. Exactly what are your standards in, quote, filtering out political speech that maybe some people out there don't agree with?
Congressman, thank you for the opportunity to address this. Our goal is to offer a platform for all ideas. We want to give everyone in the world a voice to share their experiences and ideas. A lot of that is day-to-day things that happen in their lives. Some of it is political. And frankly, I think that we've distinguished ourselves as one of the companies that defends free expression the most. We do have community standards around things that you can and cannot say. I think you would likely agree with most of them. They ban categories of harm such as promoting terrorist propaganda, child exploitation, incitement of violence, some more legalistic things like intellectual property violations, and they also ban things like hate speech that could lead to dehumanizing people and encouraging violence down the road.
If I may ask a specific of you, it was reported that Donald Trump Jr. got taken down for a period of time because he put something up on the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. Now, I wouldn't take it myself, but there still is a debate on whether it is effective either in treating or preventing COVID-19. And I think that this is a legitimate matter of discussion. And it would be up to a patient and their doctor to determine whether hydroxychloroquine was the correct medication, given the circumstances. Now, why did that happen?
Congressman, well, first, to be clear, I think what you might be referring to happened on Twitter, so it's hard for me to speak to that. But I can talk to our policies about this. We do prohibit content that will lead to imminent risk of harm, and stating that there's a proven cure for COVID when there is in fact none might encourage someone to go take something that could have some adverse effects. So we do take that down. We do not prohibit discussion around trials of drugs or people saying that they think that things might work, or personal experiences with experimental drugs. But if someone is going to say that something is proven when in fact it is not, that could lead people
wouldn't that be up for somebody on the other side of the issue to say that this is not proven? And, I know as a fact that, for people with certain conditions, it's contraindicated and they shouldn't take it on that. But wouldn't that be up to somebody else, to say, okay, what somebody posted on this really isn't true, and here's what the facts are, rather than having a Twitter or a Facebook take it down?
Congressman, in general, I agree with you, and we do not want to become the arbiters of truth. I think that would be a bad position for us to be in, and not what we should be doing. But on specific claims, if someone is going to go out and say that hydroxychloroquine is proven to cure COVID, when in fact it has not been proven to cure COVID, and that statement could lead people to take a drug that in some cases, some of the data suggests that it might be harmful to people, we think that we should take that down. That could cause imminent risk of harm.
Mr. Zuckerberg, I want to thank you for providing us information during our investigation. However, the documents you provided tell a very disturbing story. And that story is that Facebook saw Instagram as a powerful threat that could siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than compete with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the antitrust laws were designed to prevent. Now, let me explain what I mean. Mr. Zuckerberg, you have written that Facebook can likely always just buy any competitive startups. In fact, on the day Facebook bought Instagram, which you described as a threat, you wrote, quote, "One thing about startups is you can often acquire them," close quote. Mr. Zuckerberg, you were referring to companies like Instagram in that quote, weren't you?
Congressman, I don't have the exact document in front of me, but I've always been clear that we viewed Instagram both as a competitor and as a complement to our services. In the growing space around after smartphones started getting big, and they competed with us in the space of mobile cameras and mobile photo sharing. But at the time, almost no one thought of them as a general social network. And people didn't think of them as competing with us in that space. And I think that the acquisition has been wildly successful. We were able to by acquiring them, continue investing in it and growing it as a standalone brand that now reaches many more people than I think either Kevin, the co-founder, or I thought would be possible at the time, while also incorporating some of the technology into making Facebook's photos sharing products better. So yes.
Okay. Now, in early 2012, when Facebook contemplated acquiring Instagram, a competitive startup, you told your CFO that though nascent, Instagram could be very disruptive to us. And in the weeks leading up to the deal, you described Instagram as a threat, saying that, quote, "Instagram can meaningfully hurt us without becoming a huge business," unquote. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, what did you mean when you described Instagram as a threat, as disruptive? And when you said that Instagram could meaningfully hurt Facebook, did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram?
Congressman, thanks for the opportunity to address this. At the time, there was a small but growing field of
Did you mean that consumers might switch from Facebook to Instagram? That was my question.
Thanks, Congressman.
Yes or no? Did you mean that?
In the space of mobile photos and camera apps, which was growing, they were a competitor. I've been clear about that.
Fine. In February of that year, in February 2012, you told Facebook's chief financial officer that you were interested in buying Instagram. He asked you whether the purpose of the deal was to neutralize a potential competitor or to integrate their products with ours in order to improve our services. You answered that it was a combination of both, saying what we're really buying is time. Even if some new competitors springs up, those products won't get much traction since we'll already have their mechanics deployed at scale. Mr. Zuckerberg, what did you mean when you answered that the purpose of the deal was to neutralize a potential competitor?
Congressman, well, those aren't my words, but yes, I've been clear that Instagram was a competitor in the space of mobile photo sharing. There were a lot of others at the time. They competed with apps like ViscoCam and PickPlease and companies like Path. It was a subset of the overall space of connecting that we exist in. And by having them join us, they certainly went from being a competitor in the space of being a mobile camera to an app that we could help grow and help get more people to be able to use and be on our team. And I think that's been wildly successful.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, mergers and acquisitions that buy off potential competitive threats violate the antitrust laws. In your own words, you purchased Instagram to neutralize a competitive threat. If this was an illegal merger at the time of the transaction, why shouldn't Instagram now be broken off into a separate company?
Well, Congressman, I think the FTC had all of these documents and reviewed this and unanimously voted at the time not to challenge the acquisition. I mean, I think with hindsight, it probably looks like obvious that Instagram would have reached the scale that it has today, but at the time it was far from obvious. A lot of the competitors that they competed with in mobile sharing, including companies like Path, which were hot at the time and had great founders and entrepreneurs running them. Dave Moore and I worked closely with him. I don't even think Path exists today. It was not a guarantee that Instagram was going to succeed. The acquisition has done wildly well, largely because not just of the founders' talent, but because we invested heavily in building up the infrastructure and promoting it and working on security and working on a lot of things around this. And I think that this has been an American success story.
Well, thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, you're making my point. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I want to end where I began. Facebook, by Mr. Zuckerberg's own admission and by the documents we have from the time, Facebook saw Instagram as a threat that could potentially siphon business away from Facebook. And so rather than compete with it, Facebook bought it. This is exactly the type of anti-competitive acquisition that the antitrust laws were designed to prevent. This should never have happened in the first place. It should never have been permitted to happen, and it cannot happen again.
I would remind the witness that the failures of the FTC in 2012, of course, do not alleviate the antitrust challenges that the chairman described.
Mr. Zuckerberg, as you know, the proliferation of fake Facebook accounts was a key tool in the strategy of Russian interference in the American election in 2016. American law enforcement, the Senate, the House have all found that Vladimir Putin engaged in a sweeping and systematic campaign to undermine American democracy in 2016 and to work for a victory for Donald Trump. In his remarkable book, Mind Blank, and I'm being polite here, Cambridge Analytica and the Plot to Break America, whistleblower Christopher Wiley, who worked for several years at Cambridge Analytica, recounts how the Russian assault on America in Cambridge Analytica's research depended on Facebook. Quote, when Cambridge Analytica launched in the summer of 2014, Steve Bannon's goal was to change politics by changing culture. Facebook data, algorithms, and narratives were his key weapons. The Cambridge Analytica team used these tools to identify people who exhibited the three traits in what they called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. They then proceeded to bombard and activate these people, a small percentage of the American public, but still millions of people, with increasingly dark and manipulative messages from fake Facebook pages, both to get them to vote for Trump, but more importantly, to activate them as racists and white nationalists. And he goes on to describe the remarkable success of this campaign, both electorally, but also politically in the country in terms of sowing the terrible racial and ethnic divisions that you see in America today. So they waged a mass campaign of psychological warfare to polarize America around race and religion and to activate racists and anti-Semites. And it worked splendidly for them, but it didn't work so well for America. So Mr. Zuckerberg, which parts of this narrative have you addressed, or are you planning to address, or do you just see that essentially as the cost of being a forum and a marketplace for ideas? Is there nothing that can be done about the use of Facebook to engender social division in America?
Congressman, thank you. Since 2016, there have been a lot of steps that we've taken to protect the integrity of elections. We've hired, I think it's more than 30,000 people to work on safety and security. We've built up AI systems to be able to find harmful content, including being able to find more than 50 different networks of coordinated and authentic behavior, basically nation states trying to interfere in elections.
Can I pause you? Let me just pause you there for a second, because I'm interested in that. The Stop Hate for Profit campaign is a coalition that includes the Color of Change, the Anti-Defamation League, and other civil rights groups, and they're targeting Facebook right now for a boycott because of the rapid spread of hate messages online, the presence of Boogaloo and other right-wing extremist groups trying to infiltrate and disrupt Black Lives Matter protests, and the fact that alt-right, racist, and anti-Semitic content flourishes on Facebook. So they're asking you to remove these pages and essentially to join the movement for civil rights by not allowing that kind of content. Their boycotters include a lot of big companies, including Patagonia, Levi's, McDonald's, VW, Heineken, and so on. But you seem not to be that moved by their campaign, and I just wonder what you think about what they're asking you to do.
Congressman, thanks. We're very focused on fighting against election interference, and we're also very focused on fighting against hate speech. And our commitments to those issues and fighting them go back years before this recent movement. Since 2016, the defenses that the company has built up to help secure elections, not just in the US, but around the world, I think are some of the most advanced that any company or government has in the world now. We routinely now collaborate with law enforcement and intelligence agencies and are able to sometimes identify threats coming from other countries before governments are even able to. In terms of fighting hate, we've built really sophisticated systems. Our goal is to identify it before anyone even sees it on the platform. And we've built AI systems and, as I mentioned, have tens of thousands of people working on safety and security with the goal of getting this stuff down so that way before people even see it. And right now, we're able to proactively identify 89% of the hate speech that we take down before I think it's even seen by other people. So, I want to do better than 89%. I'd like to get that to 99%. But we have a massive investment here. We invest billions of dollars.
Just my time's almost out. Can you just address the proliferation of fake accounts? I understand annually you get 6.5 billion fake accounts produced there, but in some sense you have a profit motive that's linked to that because that's what's reported to your investors, the number of accounts. Are you working zealously to try to ferret out these fake accounts that are used to spread hate and disinformation?
Congressman, absolutely. We work hard on this. We take down billions of fake accounts a year. A lot of that is just people trying to set up accounts to spam people for commercial reasons. A very small percent of that are nation states trying to interfere in elections, but we're very focused on trying to find those. Having fake and harmful content on our platform does not help our business. It hurts our business. People do not want to see that stuff, and they use our services less when they do. So we are aligned with people in order to take that down, and we invest billions of dollars a year in doing so.
Final question for Mr. Zuckerberg. You spend a lot of your time speaking to our conservative colleagues who have this persecution complex that you're somehow going after them. Will you have time to meet with this broad coalition of civil rights groups that are engaged in a boycott because of what they think is the proliferation of hate speech and Holocaust revisionism and other affiliated topics on Facebook?
Congressman, yes, I already have taken the time to meet with them. I think that the topics that they're pushing on are important. On a lot of the goals, we agree. These are issues around fighting hate that we have focused on for years, and we are committed to continuing to improve the way that our company works and just continually getting better on these issues.
I appreciate that, and I will tell them of your answer.
Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2004, when you had launched Facebook, it's fair to say, I think you'd agree with me, that you had quite a few competitors. Would you agree with that?
Congressman, yes.
MySpace, Friendster, Google's Orkut, Mixi, Cyworld, Yahoo 360, AOL's Bebo, they were all competitors?
Congressman, those were some of the competitors at the time, and it's only gotten a lot more competitive since.
Well, let's talk about that, because by 2012, Mr. Zuckerberg, none of those companies that I just identified existed. You're certainly aware of that. They were all basically gone. Facebook, in my view, I think was in a monopoly by then. I wonder whether you would agree with that. I take it you don't.
Congressman, that's correct. I don't. We face a lot of competitors in every part of what we do, from connecting with friends privately, to connecting with people in communities, to connecting with all your friends at once, to connecting with all kinds of user-generated content. I mean, I would bet that you or most people here have multiple apps for each of those on your phones.
Mr. Zuckerberg, why don't we dig into this a bit further? So you and I clearly disagree about that. In 2012, I'm looking at a document that was produced by Facebook in response to the subcommittee's investigation. It's a presentation prepared for Sheryl Sandberg to deliver to the board of directors of a major telecommunications firm, boasting that, quote, Facebook is now 95% of all social media in the United States. The title of the slide is even, quote, the industry consolidates as it matures. So as I look at that graph, I certainly think most folks would concede that Facebook was a monopoly as early as it's 2012. But nonetheless, I understand that we disagree on that point. Would you agree with me that Facebook, its strategy since that time, to essentially protect what I describe as a monopoly, but obviously what you would describe as market power, that Facebook has been engaged in purchasing competition, in some cases replicating competition, and in some cases eliminating your competition? Would that be a fair statement?
Congressman, the space of people connecting with other people is a very large space, and I would agree that there were different approaches that we took to addressing different parts of that space. But it's all in service of building the best services.
And
for
I
people to
appreciate
connect
that,
with
Mr.
people they care
Zuckerberg.
about.
I appreciate the latter point. It sounds like you are conceding that at least some of those strategies were what I identified. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. In 2014, here's an email. It's from Facebook's current chief financial officer, described the company's acquisition strategy as, quote, a land grab, and saying that we are going to spend 5 to 10% of our market cap every couple of years to shore up our position. And my sense of the facts is that is in fact what has occurred. Facebook, as you conceded earlier that Instagram was a competitor of Facebook's. You acquired Instagram in 2012. Instagram is now the 6th largest social media platform in the world. Is that right?
Congressman, I'm not sure what rank it is, but it's certainly grown beyond our
I can represent to you that the statistics demonstrate that empirical data shows it's the 6th largest. In 2014, Facebook bought its competitor WhatsApp. Is that correct?
Congressman, yes, WhatsApp was also both a competitor and complementary. They competed with us in the space of mobile messaging, which is a growing and important space and is, again, one part of the global space of how people connect more broadly.
Understood. And at that time, WhatsApp had over 400 million monthly users, a clear path towards 1 billion monthly active users. And WhatsApp is now the 2nd largest social media platform in the world with 2 billion users worldwide, more than Facebook Messenger. And of course, your company owns WhatsApp. Facebook also tried to buy other competitive startups. In fact, as Chairman Nadler noted, you did tell one of Facebook's senior engineers in 2012 that you can, quote, likely buy any competitive startup, but it'll be a while before we can buy Google. Do you recall writing that email?
Congressman, I don't specifically, but it sounds like a joke.
Well, I don't take it as a joke. As I review the email, it was in regards to having just closed the Instagram sale. And the response from this individual, this engineer, to you was, quote, well played. Your response was, thanks. One reason people underestimate the importance of watching Google is that we can likely always just buy any competitive startups, but it'll be a while before we can buy Google. And given the purchases that Facebook had made previous to this and the attempted purchases, my understanding is that Facebook made several overtures to Snapchat, for example, which rebuffed those efforts, clearly demonstrates, in my view, that email was not made in jest. But here's why I ask these questions, Mr. Zuckerberg. It strikes me that over the course of the last several years, Facebook has used its market power to either purchase or replicate the competition. And Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram are the most now downloaded apps of the last decade. Your company, sir, owns them all. And we have a word for that. That word is monopoly.
Mr. Zuckerberg, in March of 2012, you suggested by email to your management team that moving faster and copying other apps could, quote, prevent our competitors from getting footholds. Sheryl Sandberg responded that, quote, it is better to do more and move faster, especially if that means you don't have competitors build products that take some of our users. Facebook's product management director added that, quote, I would love to be far more aggressive and nimble in copying competitors. Has Facebook ever taken steps to prevent competitors from getting footholds by copying competitors?
Congresswoman, I view it as our job to understand what people are finding valuable in all of the services that they use. And certainly if someone... Do you copy
your competitors?
Congresswoman, we've certainly adapted features that others have led in, as have others copied and adapted features that...
I'm not concerned about others. I'm just asking you, Mr. Zuckerberg, since March of 2012, after that email conversation, how many competitors did Facebook end up copying?
Congresswoman, I can't give you a number of companies.
Is it less than 5?
Congresswoman, I don't know.
Less than 50? Any estimates? Your team was making a plan. How did it play out?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure I agree with the premise here. Our job is to make sure that we build the best services for people to connect with all the people they care about. And a lot of that is done by innovating and by building new things that are leading the way internally.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Let me go on. Has Facebook ever threatened to clone the products of another company while also attempting to acquire that company?
Congresswoman, not that I recall.
And I'd like to just remind you that you are under oath, and there are quotes from Facebook's own documents Prior to acquiring Instagram, Facebook began developing a similar product called Facebook Camera, correct?
Congresswoman, that's correct. I've said multiple times that we were competing in the space of building mobile cameras with Instagram. That's what they did at the time. Their competitive set was companies like what we were building with Facebook Camera and ViscoCam and PicPlease.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Did you ever use this very similar Facebook Camera product to threaten Instagram's founder, Kevin Systrom?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you would mean by threaten. I think it was public that we were building a camera app at the time. That was a well-documented thing.
Let me tell you that, in a chat, you told Mr. Systrom that Facebook was, quote, developing our own photo strategy, so how we engage now will also determine how much we're partners versus competitors down the line. Instagram's founder seemed to think that was a threat. He confided in an investor at the time that he feared you would go into, quote, destroy mode if he didn't sell Instagram to you. So let's just recap. Facebook cloned a popular product, approached the company you identified as a competitive threat, and told them that if they didn't let you buy them up, there would be consequences. Were there any other companies that you used the same tactic with while attempting to buy them?
Congresswoman, I want to respectfully disagree with the characterization. I think it was clear that this was a space that we were going to compete in one way or another. I don't view those conversations as a threat in any way.
I'm just using the documents and the testimony that the committee has collected from others. Did you warn Evan Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat, that Facebook was in the process of cloning the features of his company while also attempting to buy Snapchat?
Congresswoman, I don't remember those specific conversations, but that was also an area where it was very clear that we were going to be building something. People want to be able to communicate privately. They want to be able to communicate with all their friends at once. And we're going to make sure that we build the best products in all of the spaces that we can around helping people stay connected with the people they care about.
I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think the question again here is, when the dominant platform threatens its potential rivals, that should not be a normal business practice. Facebook is a case study, in my opinion, in monopoly power because your company harvests and monetizes our data, and then your company uses that data to spy on competitors and to copy, acquire, and kill rivals. You've used Facebook's power to threaten smaller competitors and to ensure that you always get your way. These tactics reinforce Facebook's dominance, which you then use in increasingly destructive ways. So Facebook's very model makes it impossible for new companies to flourish separately, and that harms our democracy, it harms mom and pop businesses, and it harms consumers. Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Zuckerberg, during discussions of changing Facebook's platform policy in 2012, you said that, and I quote, in any model, I'm assuming we enforce our policies against competitors much more strongly. It sounds like Facebook weaponizes its policies to target competitors. Why would Facebook enforce its policies against competitors more strongly?
When we were a much smaller company, we saw that—
This is 2012 now. This was in 2012, so please go right ahead.
Sure. We've had policies in the past that have prevented our competitors, which at the time we were primarily worried about larger competitors, from using our platforms to grow and compete with us. So we had some of those policies. We continually review them over time. And
okay, Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2013, a senior Facebook employee identified Message Me as a fast-growing app on Facebook and said that we will restrict their access. Was this another example of enforcing Facebook's policies against competitors much more strongly? Message Me.
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with that specific example, but we did have that policy.
Okay, let's move to another one and see if you remember this one. In 2014, other Facebook product managers openly discussed removing Pinterest's access to Facebook's platform tools. As one employee said, I am 100% in favor of the idea of moving it from Pinterest, but I am not recommending removing it from Netflix going forward. Why would Facebook product managers want to restrict Pinterest's access to Facebook but not Netflix?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with that exchange. I don't think I was on that.
Why do you think you wouldn't have to be on that, but why do you think they made that decision or would make a decision like that?
Well, Congresswoman, as I said, we used to have a policy that restricted competitors from using our platform, and Pinterest is a social competitor with us. It's one of the many competitors that allow people to share different types of
Mr.
content with their
Zuckerberg, these
communities.
examples and supporting documents strongly suggest that Facebook does weaponize its platform policies, enforcing them selectively to undermine competitors. But
Mr. Zuckerberg, we've seen the dominance of several of the companies appearing before us today, that it's not just harmful to our economy and competition, but it's harmful to the founding principles of our democracy. Facebook and Google are designed to keep users on their platforms whatever the cost, because disinformation, propaganda, and hateful speech are good for engagement, they're good for business. But over 100 years ago, the Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote, "The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing panic." My first question is, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you agree with that principle, that there are limits to harmful and false speech, and that are particularly important when it comes to the health and safety of the public?
Congressman, I certainly do, and I actually think that our policies go further than just limiting those types of things.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, you have 1 billion users and almost 50,000 employees, and so you agree you have a responsibility to remove harmful lies from your platform, correct?
Congressman, I think we have a responsibility to limit the spread of content that's going to be harmful for people. And also, if you, I'd like to add that I do not believe that we have any incentive to have this content on our service. People don't like it.
Except that, Mr. Zuckerberg, with all due respect, except that it is often the most engaging. It's the most, it brings the most likes, or it brings the most activity, which of course produces great profit. So you do have an incentive. The more engagement there is, the more money you make on advertising. So let me ask you a question. Let me give you some specific examples that will illustrate my concerns. These are some of the top 10 most shared articles on Facebook in 2020. Trump suggests injection of disinfectant to beat coronavirus and clean the lungs. Coronavirus hype, biggest political hoax in history. U.S. hospitals getting paid more to label cause of death as coronavirus. During the greatest public health crisis of our lifetime, don't you agree that these articles viewed by millions on your platform will cost lives?
Congressman, with respect, we certainly have policies that prohibit false information about COVID that would lead to imminent harm. And we've been quite aggressive about taking that down, as some of the questioning from the other side of the aisle has shown so far.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg,
I'm quite proud of our efforts here.
Well,
we
with all due respect, the problem is Facebook is profiting off and amplifying disinformation that harms others because it's profitable. This isn't a speech issue. It's about Facebook's business model that prioritizes engagement in order to keep people on Facebook's platform to serve up more advertisements. So I'll ask you very specifically, what are you doing right now to protect people from demonstrably false claims related to this deadly pandemic?
Congressman, I'll certainly answer that, but I have to disagree with the assertion that you're making that this content is somehow helpful for our business. It is not what people want to see, and we rank our what we show in feed based on what is going to be the most meaningful to people and is going to create long-term satisfaction, not what's just going to get engagement or clicks today. That's a common misconception about the company.
If that's true, Mr. Zuckerberg, how do you explain that on Monday, the second most popular post on Facebook was a Breitbart video claiming that you don't need a mask and hydroxychloroquine is a cure for COVID. And in the first 5 hours after being posted on Facebook, it racked up 20 million views and over 100,000 comments before Facebook acted to remove it.
Well, Congressman, a lot of people shared that, and we did take it down because it violates our policies. We work with the
After
CDC
20 million
to figure
people
out.
saw it over the period of 5 hours. I mean, doesn't that suggest, Mr. Zuckerberg, that your platform is so big that even with the right policies in place, you can't contain deadly content?
Congressman, I don't think so. I think we have, on COVID misinformation in particular, a relatively good track record of fighting and taking down lots of false content, as well as putting up authoritative information. We have built a COVID information center
I understand
with
that.
authoritative information from health officials.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. I just have one more question for you.
2 billion people.
I appreciate that. Mr. Zuckerberg, if a television station runs a false political advertisement, they're held liable for that. Why should Facebook or any other platform be different? While you may not be a publisher, you're responsible maybe not for the first posting, but you then take that posting and you apply a set of algorithms that decide how you will disseminate that, which is a business decision, not a First Amendment decision. And it's hard to understand why Facebook shouldn't be responsible for those business decisions.
Congressman, in terms of political ads, we've modeled a lot of our policies off of the FCC guidelines on broadcasters and their requirements to run political ads equally from all different sides.
Well,
Cable
I think
networks, of course, have more.
I think these examples, unfortunately, Mr. Zuckerberg, are just the tip of the iceberg. It's not just about COVID. Facebook hosts or enables countless pages and ads that are dedicated to conspiracy theories and calls to violence, including content that led to the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville in 2017. And Facebook gets away with it because you're the only game in town. There's no competition forcing you to police your own platform. Allowing this misinformation to spread can lead to violence. And frankly, I believe it strikes at the very heart of American democracy.
I want to just ask one last question of Mr. Zuckerberg. Over 1,100 companies and organizations pulled their advertising business from Facebook as part of the Stop Hate for Profit campaign to protest the spread of hate speech and disinformation. But you had a staff meeting earlier this month where you told employees we're not going to change our policies or approach because of a threat to any % of our revenue. My guess is all these advertisers will be back on the platform soon enough. Mr. Zuckerberg, are you so big that you don't care how you're impacted by a major boycott of 1,100 advertisers?
No, Congresswoman, of course we care, but we're also not going to set our content policies because of advertisers. I think that would be the wrong thing for us to do. We've cared about issues like fighting hate speech for a long time, and we've invested billions of dollars. And I've talked about today how we have tens of thousands of content reviewers. We've built AI systems that proactively identify the majority. We're now at 89% of the hate speech that we remove before anyone even reports it to us. We're going to continue getting better at that. And I think that those investments over time and the results that we put up will be recognized by people, since I do believe that they are industry leading. And I think that our advertising also is, for a lot of small businesses, the most effective or among the most effective ways that they can find and reach new customers.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. My time has expired, but I would just say that I know you've commissioned your own civil rights audit. I don't think that you've implemented all those recommendations yet. I hope you will move quickly to implement those. This is a critical time as we watched the body of John Lewis leave us here in the Capitol, that we focus on civil rights. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Facebook is dominant not just in the social media market, but also in its digital surveillance capabilities. In 2012, Facebook had several tools that allowed it to conduct digital surveillance, including trackers, Facebook's like button, Facebook login, and a series of application programming interfaces, or APIs. Mr. Zuckerberg, these tools provide Facebook with insights into its competitors' websites and apps. Isn't that correct?
I think broadly the answer to what you're saying is yes. Right. We, every other company here, do market research to understand what people are finding valuable.
All right, okay, so you're going beyond the scope of my question. I appreciate that answer, though. Mr. Zuckerberg, a few days before Facebook acquired Instagram, a Facebook vice president emailed you suggesting ways to improve Facebook's, quote, competitive research, end quote. By building a custom model, Facebook could improve its understanding of its competitors and, quote, make more bold decisions on whether they are friends or foes, end quote. Mr. Zuckerberg, how does Facebook improve its competitive research to distinguish friends from foe?
Congressman, I'm not sure exactly what he was referring to in that email there, but he is one of the people involved in running our analytics organization, and I think it's natural that he would as part of his responsibility, be focused on market research and understanding more there.
And certainly, isn't it true that Facebook, after that conversation, purchased the web analytics company Onevo in 2013 to give Facebook more capability to monitor its competitors?
Congressman, I think you have the timing correct. After we purchased Onevo as part of our broader market research capacity.
And that would give you the capability to monitor your competitors, correct?
Congressman, it gave aggregate analytics as to what people were using and what people were finding valuable. Sort of like the type of product you would get from Nielsen or ComScore, some of these other third-party companies that provide similar data.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, that acquisition gave you non-public real-time data about engagement, usage, and how much time people spend on apps. And when it became public that Facebook was using Onevo to conduct digital surveillance, your company got kicked out of Apple's App Store. Isn't that true?
Congressman, I'm not sure I'd characterize it in that way. I think this was part of a broader
Onevo did get kicked out of the App Store. Isn't that true?
Congressman, I believe we took the app out after Apple changed their policies.
And it was because of the use of the surveillance tools.
Congressman, I'm not sure that the policy was worded that way, or that's exactly the right characterization of it. But
okay, well, let me ask you this
Apple changed their
question.
policy.
Let me ask you this question. After Onevo was booted out of the App Store, you turned to other surveillance tools, such as Facebook Research app, correct?
Congressman, in general, yes, we do a broad variety of market research, as do other
And
companies.
also, isn't it true, Mr. Zuckerberg, that Facebook paid teenagers to sell their privacy by installing Facebook Research app?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that, but I think it's a general practice to be able to that companies use to have different surveys and understand data from how people are using different products and what their preferences are.
Facebook Research app got thrown out of the App Store too. Isn't that true?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, well, over nearly a decade, Mr. Zuckerberg, you led a sustained effort to surveil smaller competitors to benefit Facebook. These were steps taken to abuse data, to harm competitors, and to shield Facebook from competition. You tried one thing and then you got caught, made some apologies, then you did it all over again. Isn't that true?
Congressman, I respectfully disagree with that characterization. I think every company engages in research to understand what their customers are enjoying so that they can learn and make their products better. And that's what we were trying to do. That's what our analytics team was doing. I think in general, that allowed us to make our services better for people to be able to connect in a whole lot of different ways, which is our goal.
Did you use that capability to purchase WhatsApp?
Congressman, it was one of the signals that we had about WhatsApp's trajectory, but we didn't need it. Without that, it was pretty clear that WhatsApp was a great product. I already had a relationship with Jan Koum, the founder.
And it was a competitor.
I think Mr. Zuckerberg would like to clarify something for the record as well.
Chairman, thank you. In response to Congressman Johnson's question before, I said that I wasn't familiar with the Facebook Research app when I wasn't familiar with that name for it, but I just want to be clear that I do recall that we used an app for research, and it has since been discontinued, and I would be happy to follow up with his staff on any more details that he would like on that.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. The record shall so reflect. I recognize him.
Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2004, there were dozens of social media companies. Facebook distinguished itself from the competitors by focusing specifically on privacy. You had a short, clear privacy policy. It was just 950 words. It made a promise to users, and I quote, "We do not and will not use cookies to collect private information from any user." And you said, "will not." That's a commitment about the future, and that was 2004. Mr. Zuckerberg, today, does Facebook use cookies to collect private information on users?
Congresswoman, my understanding to that is no. We're not using cookies to collect private information about people who use our services, and I believe we've upheld that commitment.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you think that your company would be as successful if it had started with today's cookies policy in place?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but in general, cookies is not a big part of how we're collecting information. We've primarily used them to make sure that someone can stay logged in on the web. We use them to some degree for security to make sure that you don't have someone trying to log in under a lot of different accounts for one computer or something like that.
So, Mr. Zuckerberg, once again, you do not use cookies.
Just to make
Yes
sure
or
I'm
no?
clear, we do use cookies.
Yes or no?
We do use cookies.
Okay.
Yes, we do use cookies.
Okay, so Mr. Zuckerberg, the bottom line here is that you broke a commitment to your users. And who can say if you may or may not do that again in the future? The reality is that Facebook's market power grew and Facebook sacrificed its users' policy.
The tech industry is an American success story. The products we build have changed the world and improved people's lives. Our industry is one of the ways that America shares its values with the world and one of our greatest economic and cultural exports. Facebook is part of this story. We started with an idea to give people the power to share and connect, and we've built services that billions of people find useful. I'm proud that we've given people who've never had a voice before the opportunity to be heard, and given small businesses access to tools that only the largest players used to have. Since COVID emerged, I'm proud that people have used our services to stay in touch with friends and family who they can't be with in person, and to keep their small businesses running online when physical stores are closed. I believe that Facebook and the US tech industry are a force for innovation and empowering people, but I recognize that there are concerns about the size and power of tech companies. Our services are about connection, and our business model is advertising, and we face intense competition in both. Many of our competitors have hundreds of millions or billions of users. Some are upstarts, but others are gatekeepers with the power to decide if we can even release our apps in their app stores to compete with them. In many areas, we're behind our competitors. The most popular messaging service in the US is iMessage. The fastest growing app is TikTok. The most popular app for video is YouTube. The fastest growing ads platform is Amazon. The largest ads platform is Google. And for every dollar spent on advertising in the US, less than 10 cents is spent with us. We're here to talk about online platforms, but I think the true nature of competition is much broader. When Google bought YouTube, they could compete against the dominant player in video, which is the cable industry. When Amazon bought Whole Foods, they could compete against Kroger's and Walmart. When Facebook bought WhatsApp, we could compete against telcos who used to charge 10 cents a text message, but not anymore. Now people can watch video, get groceries delivered, and send private messages for free. That's competition. New companies are created all the time, all over the world. And history shows that if we don't keep innovating, someone will replace every company here today. And that change can often happen faster than you expect. Of the 10 most valuable companies a decade ago, only 3 still make that list today. And if you look at where the top technology companies come from, a decade ago, the vast majority were American. Today, almost half are Chinese. Aside from competition, there are other serious issues related to the internet, including questions about elections, harmful content, and privacy. And while these are not antitrust issues and are not specifically the topic of today's hearing, I recognize that we are often at the center of these discussions. We build platforms for sharing ideas, and important debates play out across our services. I believe that this ultimately leads to more progress, but it means we often find ourselves in the middle of deep disagreements about social issues and high-stakes elections. I personally don't believe that private companies should be making so many decisions about these issues by themselves. And that's why last year, I made the case that there needs to be new regulation for the internet. Facebook stands for a set of basic principles: giving people voice and economic opportunity, keeping people safe, upholding democratic traditions like freedom of expression and voting, and enabling an open and competitive marketplace. These are fundamental values for most of us, but not for everyone in the world. Not for every company we compete with or the countries they represent. And as global competition increases, there is no guarantee that our values will win out. I'm proud of the services we build and how they improve people's lives. We compete hard. We compete fairly. We try to be the best. That's what I was taught matters in this country. And when we succeed, it's because we deliver great experiences that people love.